Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we finally have from Deafheaven, Lonely People with Power. So I go back and forth on whether I've been fair to Deafheaven over the years. Yeah, I'll be the first to acknowledge that Sunbather is excellent, and an album since they have certainly had their moments, and I've had more than a few colleagues vouch for them not being in sketchy territory, especially in recent years. Can't say I'm all that pleased with my review of Ordinary Corrupt Human Love from 2018, especially some of the aspersions I made in their direction that were not charitable, but there's always been something about the undercurrent of nihilism that kind of hits an odd, discomforting note for me in their content, even as I have gotten deeper into black metal, and with each project tilting more towards shimmering, effervescent shoegaze, culminating in 2021's Infinite Granite that wound up a real dud for me. I don't know. I want to give them a proper chance with the benefit of time and retrospect and more context, come close to meeting them where they are. It certainly helps matters here that reportedly Lonely People with Power was a proper return to more atmospheric black metal, blackgaze, even with some saying it was on the same tier as Sunbather. And you know what, while I will not go that far, I do think it's probably the most I've liked a Deafheaven album in nearly a decade now. Maybe not having the most striking ear candy moments in the same way that Ordinary Corrupt Human Love did with songs like Honeycomb, or the titanic, glorious explosions of Sunbather, but probably their most thematically refined and resonant project to date, and I want to start there, because while I've described Deafheaven as nihilistic before, this is the natural expansion, the more complex follow-through of that reckoning with power that folks have, and the costs therein of having and using that power, with perhaps the most stark examination of fatherhood and masculine cycles that they have ever approached. And some self-awareness snaps into view right from Doberman. It's never explicitly about the band, but in the symbolism of the panopticon being observed and imprisoned and judged from every angle, you can tell there is this deep-seated terror at that isolation as the panic crescendo ramps up, but why succumb to that fear when you have power? Magnolia sees frontman George Clark racked by grief at the loss of a family member, and the parallel he draws to his own father's depression and alcohol abuse, feeling the weight of being built from said yesterdays. But maybe he doesn't have to be. And you see the arc of attempting to escape some of that past trauma, where he knows loneliness might be a steep cost for seizing power, but if it can stifle the pain, well, my Heathen, you hear the sharp Nietzschean juxtaposition between someone who voluntarily surrenders their power, but one who takes it, against the clash between reverb beauty and cacophonous shredding. And what's interesting is that Clark frames these songs rather widely. In interviews, he described how loneliness could be equivocated for ignorance, where people just do not know enough to do well by each other, so in order to preserve themselves and their power, they might isolate themselves. So when you talk about, say, parents in this case, it might translate to familial neglect. And while there is a struggle not to be judgmental for, say, his parents, he sees too much of it in himself to really cast much blame. Some of it is systemic for one, but also requires more forgiveness in that messy human tangle. And then there's the other side to it. The process of amassing any sort of power can be profoundly isolating, not just in who gets discarded along the way, but how many will never fully understand the weight of that responsibility, or just be ignorant and don't grasp how reckless usage of that power is gonna drive people away. You wind up alone. Hell, there are moments where you can tell that it's alienation from parts of one's own self in order to get power, hiding even from oneself, and that naturally leads to an interesting conversation about machismo on body behavior, where he speaks of an older relative showing him porn, and it's highlighting how men are introduced to a framing of masculinity that can be fundamentally exploitative, at the very least hierarchical, alienating one's own emotions from themselves in the performance of being a man. The struggle might feel biblical in the framing, but it's also intensely personal when you have a moment like Incidental 3, where a surprising touch of feminine tenderness might just break it all apart if you're not used to it. And while there's always been a near suicidal edge to how such a nihilistic arc might end, here in the embrace of the illusion disappearing on the marvelous orange tree, there's a little bit more peace having been made with that darkness. The demons are always going to be there. It's not a capstone to put them aside, more a warning to be on one's guard should you slip back into that same pattern. And the comparison I'm actually going to make is Jason Isbell, who across a number of records now has seen both reconciliation and the backslide in full view. So if I have such glowing things to say about the songwriting and themes, never would have expected that, how is the music measuring up? Well, it kind of feels like it's trying to split the difference multiple ways for a more song-focused and atomized project than ever. The thunderous blast beats from the perennially underrated Daniel Tracy, Kerry McCoy just absolutely shredding with some passages featuring, well, let's be honest, some of his most meticulous work to date. That warp shredding on Doberman, Magnolia, and Revelator, they absolutely rip. George Clark's voice and shredded screams, thankfully taking a little bit more airtime than the clean singing that, quite frankly, he's never impressed me with. And the bass lines, well, a little haphazard overall, especially when you get a cut like Body Behavior that is shockingly bouncy, even catchy to boot in that groove. But producer Justin Mendel-Johnson finally has a lush heaviness to really work with here, with Amethyst and Winona carrying some of their most best shoegaze-leaning moments in such raw beauty, but also some of their strongest crescendos. Now, it's by no means the most melodic in their catalog. The production has an odd habit of letting some of their brightest crescendo moments get a little bit lost further in the back at their peak than I would prefer, and with deeper knowledge of atmospheric black metal, I'd say Deafheaven has yet to truly hit some of the blackgaze triumphs that I've heard both before and after them. They did not invent this genre, and I also can't say all the atmospheric experiments fully work for me, like the shuddering noise attempt on Incidental 2, or how Revelator kills all of its momentum midway through for this haunted interlude with some really slapdash transitions when they get back to the shredding. But overall, yeah, color me impressed. I like this project way more than I thought I would. And while I would not put it among my favorite atmospheric black metal albums this year, it shows not just a return to form, but also some tangible progression for the band, especially in themes and content. Probably the closest that they've seen to greatness in over 10 years. You've probably already made the time to hear it. If you haven't, I'd say it's worth it. This is a power worth sharing. Don't wind up lonely. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yes, I know I'm very, very late to this. I'm trying to churn my way through my backlog, but as you can probably hear, my voice is kind of shredded right now. There's some IRL stuff going on. That's why the plant is here. I'm not going to say anything else about that. You'll find out later soon enough. Beyond that, though, if you guys got any comments on where you think this falls among Deafheaven's catalog, curious what you all think about it, because again, I've never been the hugest fan of this band, but I can acknowledge greatness when I hear it. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all wouldn't get involved in helping support the channel, get albums on my schedule so I can cover them earlier, or hell, just yell at me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Don't feel obligated, tough times, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.